Yeah, and Paul, I've got audio on this too.
Okay,
so
I'll
that-
listen to that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Captain Jeff Roby here at Troop C. Thank you all for coming today, and also those who are watching online with us as well. Before we begin, I'd first like to thank the people of Superior for their assistance in this investigation. That community has come together in the days following this tragic event. That's a credit to the leaders of that community. I'd also like to thank Sheriff Baker and Chief Jill Allgood for the quick response from each of their agencies on October 21st. They've also been helpful in this investigation thus far. Our continued thoughts are with all those involved in this incident, especially the families of Mrs. Sandy Nelson and Mr. Darren Kopke. While this investigation remains ongoing, we've consulted with the Nuckolls County Attorney and are able to release more details on the events of October 21st at the Agrex elevator in Superior. I want to state outright that the Nebraska State Patrol considers all the survivors of this terrible incident to be victims, and we will not be releasing their names. That includes the person who returned fire and ultimately stopped this active shooting event. As I said the day after the incident, that man's quick actions likely saved lives. As the investigation has progressed, that conclusion has become even more clear. Without question, his heroic actions prevented this tragedy from becoming even worse. In addition to that, the actions of Mr. Kopke also likely saved lives, unfortunately giving his own life in the process. Lieutenant Bachstetter, our investigative supervisor, will detail that as he gives a timeline of the events that occurred that afternoon in Superior. Lieutenant Bachstetter?
Thank you, Captain. All right, as the captain mentioned, I also too want to acknowledge the families of those the lost loved ones in this incident. Those are the people that truly need to be recognized. I also want to acknowledge the work of my investigative staff, the quick work that they've done to do this in a thorough, professional, and sensitive manner has gotten back to us as the supervisors that those involved are very appreciative of the work of our investigators. So to get into the timeline, as the captain mentioned, at approximately 1 o'clock that afternoon, two managing employees of Agrex met with Mr. Hoskinson after the lunch break, at which point they terminated his employment with the company. That meeting lasted only a few minutes, and witnesses reported that they parted on what seemed to be cordial terms. At that point, Mr. Hoskinson left the building per company policy. Within about 5 minutes of the meeting, he was observed by other employees leaving the property in his vehicle and driving away from the elevator. At that point, the two managers then called a meeting with two other employees to discuss the company's plans moving forward in the manager's office. The victim, Darren Kopke, was part of that meeting. While that closed-door meeting was occurring, for your reference, that meeting is occurring in this bottom office on the diagram there. While that meeting is occurring, about 15 minutes later, Mr. Hoskinson returned to the building. That's demarked by the blue line of his return. He came back in the same door that he left and went to what is on the top office on the diagram, which was his former office. At that point, the other staff in the building were unaware that his employment had been terminated. They were not alarmed by him being there, since the managers were still in their closed-door meeting, and they had not made announcements to the rest of the staff that Mr. Hoskinson had been terminated. Within a couple minutes of Mr. Hoskinson's going to his office, the victim, Sandy Nelson, had returned to her office from her lunch break and resumed her workday. Her office is the center of the three on the diagram. Also at that point, we don't believe that Mrs. Nelson knew that the manager's meeting was occurring or that Mr. Hoskinson had been terminated from employment. Very soon after Mrs. Nelson was back to her office, At that point, Mr. Hoskinson left his office, which is demarked by the red line. He walked down the hallway directly to the open doorway of Mrs. Nelson's office. He retrieved a handgun from his waistband and immediately fired 2 rounds, one striking Mrs. Nelson in the chest and the other in her left upper arm and shoulder. The pathologist has indicated to our investigators that the shot to the chest was nearly instantly fatal. A point of note, Mr. Hoskinson's path to Mrs. Nelson's desk went directly past 2 other employees who were working at their workspaces, and he had no interaction with them at all. That manager's meeting is occurring just a few feet away in that other office. Those employees reported to our investigators that they immediately recognized the sounds they heard to be gunshots. One of those employees was aware of a shotgun that had been kept in that office's closet for pest control purposes on the property, and he retrieved that shotgun and loaded the weapon. While that is occurring, Mr. Hoskinson then immediately walks towards the manager's office door and started to try to push that door open, still armed with the handgun. Witnesses involved in that reported that Mr. Kepke threw himself against that office door in an attempt to barricade the door as Mr. Hoskinson tried to open it, and he was injured by a round that was fired ultimately through the door, which struck him in the left abdominal area, causing injuries to his lung, liver, and heart, which was ultimately his fatal wound. A second party in that room also tried to barricade the door as Mr. Hoskinson was trying to enter the room and was pushed back as Mr. Kepke fell into him. At that point, Mr. Hoskinson's gun appeared to have jammed or malfunctioned, causing him to briefly pause his shooting for a few seconds to clear the weapon stoppage. After getting the weapon cleared, he fired a second round through the door, striking a second victim in that room, which resulted in a minor injury to that individual. Mr. Hoskinson then forced the door open and stepped into that office doorway, and as he did so, shot Mr. Kepke again in the chest as he was lying on the floor. At that point, within seconds, the employee who had retrieved the shotgun fired 1 round from the shotgun, which struck Mr. Hoskinson in the right arm and chest, and that shot incapacitated him, causing him to fall onto the hallway floor and drop the handgun at that point. Again, all of these rounds being fired at the manager's office occurred within a matter of a few seconds. The employee with the shotgun noticed that the handgun had fallen to the floor, and he retrieved it and moved it away from Mr. Hoskinson. That entire shooting event lasted just under 20 seconds from the first shot fired by Mr. Hoskinson that struck Mrs. Nelson. The investigation reveals that the 911 calls started being received by the Nelson Sheriff's Office within 1 minute of the shots being fired. At that point then, employees began to render aid to the injured victims and made several more 911 calls to relay additional information. Volunteer emergency medical services, both from the Superior and Nelson fire departments, were dispatched to the scene, with the first units arriving in approximately 5 minutes of the first 911 calls. Law enforcement from the Superior Police Department, Nuckolls County Sheriff's Office, and an investigator with the Nebraska State Patrol that was in Superior at the time were the initial first responders to the scene from the law enforcement perspective. Over time, additional troopers from the State Patrol's Uniform Patrol Division and our Investigative Services Division responded to assist with the investigation. Both Mr. Kepke and Mr. Hoskinson were transported to Broadstone Memorial Hospital in Superior. Mr. Hoskinson died at the hospital in Superior about 1 hour after the shooting, and Mr. Kepke died after being transferred by medical helicopter to Bryan West Hospital in Lincoln about 6 hours after the shooting incident. The third shooting victim was transported by private vehicle to Broadstone Memorial Hospital in Superior. He was treated and released for his wound. That's a summary of the timeline. I've got a couple other items of note that have been asked of us over time. So in summary, Mr. Hoskinson fired a total of 5 rounds from his handgun, and he ejected 1 live round when he had to clear the stoppage of his weapon. Mr. Hoskinson's gun was still loaded, and he had another 9 rounds remaining in the weapon's magazine for a total of 10 rounds left when he was incapacitated upon being shot. He had no other magazines on his person or in his vehicle for the handgun. Again, he was gone for about 15 to 17 minutes between his termination and when he came back. At this point, we do not have any report or any information confirmed as to where he went or if he had contacted anyone during that time he was gone from the elevator. He was in his office for approximately 5 minutes after he returned before he came out and shot Mrs. Nelson. There were a total of 8 employees in the building at the time of the shooting, as well as several other employees that were working outside on the grounds of the property. And as Captain Roby mentioned, it's become clear to us that the quick actions of Mr. Kepke and those targeted in the manager's office likely saved the lives of several others that were in that office, others in the building, and then I don't think it's a stretch to say that potentially other citizens in the area or responding law enforcement officers in the community were also spared had he been able to leave the property and engage with anybody else out in the community. With that, I'll turn it back over to Captain Roby. If you have anything, that's a summary of the timeline of the events.
Thank you, Lieutenant. And as I stated when I first came up, you know, the community has really come together here as of late after this incident. A lot of that is due to the people of that community coming together to support each other. I'll be able to take some questions here. With your questions, please note that some things are going to be investigative in nature, and there's some things I just won't be able to answer.
What kind of gun he had?
Right over here.
What was Hoskinson's position at the facility?
He was in marketing.
So Mrs. Nelson wasn't in the meeting where he was fired?
She was not. She was in her office, marked there, essentially the first one in red there under the blue arrow.
Yeah. So, any idea why she was targeted or just?
Well, we can't do an interview of Mr. Hoskinson at this point. So anything there would be speculative, and I really don't want to try to enter my objection to that.
I mean, it wasn't like he was blaming her or something, or?
At the time of the incident, no.
Jeff, is the investigation still going, or is the investigation essentially wrapped up? Are there going to be any charges? Have you worked with the county attorney? What determination have they made?
Right, so there's still some of the investigation coming together here, but we've been able to consult with the Knuckles County attorney, and in them, those consultations, charges are not going to be fired or filed on anyone with this incident.
In fact, do you think that those who acted likely saved lives?
Yes, as we stated before, there's no doubt there was means yet to inflict more harm. The actions taken by those inside the building controlled those means, and we think possibly more people could have been injured if they wouldn't have acted as quickly as they did. If you look at the timeline that the lieutenant talked about here, the shooting incident was less than 20 seconds. Inside that 20 seconds, you have employees that were taking action to block a door, and then also one that ultimately ended the active shooting event. It should be noted also, other than those people within the building there, were immediately calling 911. And in less than 1 minute, the 911 center was getting calls for assistance.
So 20 seconds from when the first shot was fired to when it was over, is that?
That's correct.
Right. And the door to that office, was there a window there? Could they see him coming, or were they alerted by the sound of the gun, or what?
From the investigation and the interviews that we've done, it was noted that people within that office there, where those 4 supervisors essentially were, noted that they believed that that was gunshots that were coming, and they had not seen any other action through any windows. They just noted that they thought that that was gunshots.
That's not a windowed office. if
Not
that's your question.
okay. And can you say what kind of a pistol it was? Was it
It was a 9mm.
which has a magazine of what, 15, 12?
In this case, I believe it was a 17-round magazine.
17 rounds. And did he have any other ammunition on him? You said no.
No.
And do you know where he got the gun? Was it something he owned, or did he buy it that day? Or?
That's going to be one of those investigative issues that we're not going to speak to today.
So, was there any mention did you talk to the families about whether there was any interaction between Hoskinson and the families of the victims, whether outside of work? Was there any interaction there, or was Hoskinson totally just interacting with the employees at the facility?
During the incident, it was only those employees at the facility.
But in the past, had like the employees' families met Hoskinson outside of the facility in the past?
That I wouldn't be able to comment on. It wasn't part of this investigation or what we're going to speak to today.
And do you know, did he have past problems at work? Had he been suspended? Had he been put on probation or something in the past? Was this a culmination of a long series of problems, or you think a spur of the moment reaction to being fired?
Those are going to be work performance issues that we're not going to speak of. We're just going over the facts of the incident that took place there. What we do know, as the lieutenant mentioned, after he was terminated, it appeared that he was leaving cordially and then returned in the same manner.
Yeah.
Like 15 minutes later.
Correct.
And Jeff, you said there was a trooper. I mean, do you guys normally have a trooper stationed in Superior? I know with the manpower staffing levels, I don't know how close normally you would have somebody there.
Right, we have troopers down in that area, in the Hastings Superior area. On this day, we happen to have an investigator that was down in Superior area, so he was able to respond very quickly with the police department and the sheriff's department, which were able to respond extremely quickly to this event.
But even if somebody were to be there within a couple of minutes, it sounds like this was over in a matter of seconds, really.
It was, and I think that goes to the actions of those inside there, that were able to at least control what they could control. And there was no further lives lost because of that.
And the people inside the office, they're all supervisors?
They're all employees of Agrex. There were supervisors on scene due to the termination, and then there was other employees that were there because they worked there.
And just to be super clear, the person who was able to get the shotgun was not the person wounded, right? It was someone else.
That is correct.
Right. And did Hoskinson say anything while this was going on, or did he leave any messages or anything?
There was no messages that were left. And then during the incident, that would be part of that investigative part that we're not going to release.
But you are, based on what you know, you were kind of surprised, given that he left without really complaining or without grumping or whatever, that he came back?
Well, I think the surprise is the actions that he took when he came back.
Yeah.
Is there any surveillance footage from inside, and when or if would that be released?
Right. That is going to be part of the investigative packet that will go to the county attorney.
So,
So there was?
There is surveillance video on site.
so once the investigation is over, that will be released.
It won't be released by the Nebraska State Patrol.
Be released by the county attorney.
That would have to come from his office.
Did that assist you with kind of the timeline aspect of things?
Some of it did, yes.
Was he saying things? I mean, I know you can't say what he said, but was he
Right.
saying things?
Not that we're able to release at this time.
Okay, so that, yeah, okay.
Oh, and I want to be clear, everybody in the building was employees. It's not like somebody dropped off a load of corn and came in for a cup of coffee or something. I mean, no customers in there.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, at this time. I will add that once this incident did take place, even the employees that were on the inside were thinking of the employees on the outside and started moving them away from that building also. So a very coordinated effort from those that were inside, not only those that were directly involved in the office where the shooting took place, but like I said, the office staff that started to render aid almost immediately and started to call 911, which eventually got EMS there from Superior and Nelson there very quickly to start rendering aid.
Do you have the time of day when those calls were made, the 911 calls? How quickly?
Well, the incident took place, what do we say, right around 1,
About 1:20, 1:25, I think.
right.
Yeah.
So those calls came in 1 minute after that event started.
And you said the rescuers were there within 5 minutes? Is that right?
Yes, very quickly, within 5 to 6 minutes.
But it's pretty clear to you, he wasn't just after a couple people, you think he was gonna shoot some more people?
he had the means to do so,
Yeah.
in this case.
Is it known, or can you say if Hoskinson's owned other firearms outside of the one he used?
I won't be able to say. So if there's no other questions on this,
Can I ask what kind of
Sure.
shotgun it was? Might as well ask that. Is it 12 BA?
that's still part of the investigative packet that we'll send forward.
But it only, one was fired once.
One shot.
Okay.
You know, I just want to reiterate, our heart goes out to the community there, everyone that was involved in the incident there. The community is healing, those families are healing. So we think about those as this investigation progresses. And that is all that I have today. Thank you for coming out and those that are online watching today.
Can I just ask quick, have you briefed the family about what you've been able to find?